I hate to say it.
And we're live. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Technology adds to our life, and it also hinders our life. But we are carrying on with Kedoshim. That comes next in our Torah cycle, and we're going to begin on page 694. It is kind of hard to pick the best parts of Kedoshim because there's a lot of really, really good stuff in here. But we're going to touch on a topic that I think has become perhaps more germane in recent years than ever before. But we have to do a little build up to get there. So we're on 694. And we're going to begin at the bottom of the column, which is on verse 9. And I'll need a volunteer.
John.
Thank you.
When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, the Lord, am your God.
All right, so there is first of all, a point that we should discuss, which is the fact that you'll see this phrase at the end of many passages, I am the Lord your God, but not all of them. And it kind of creates an interesting question of, if God is going to remind us that God is God when giving us some commandments, why doesn't God remind us that God is God when giving us every commandment? And the traditional answer is that where we see this additional reminder of God being God when we are commanded is precisely at times when those commandments could easily be broken with no external evidence of their breakage. So take a look at the commandment that was just given. With that in mind, how could somebody subvert this commandment and no one would be able to take them to court, point the finger, or even be, socially upset with them? Well, what is the commandment, first of all?
You leave part of your harvest, your produce of the land, you leave part of it so that the wandering poor people.
Mm-hmm. Well, it wasn't always wandering. Sometimes it was your neighbor.
Your neighbor can go ahead and pick something to eat, and without having to come knock on your door and beg for food.
Right, as well as the additional gleanings and things that had fallen during your harvest time, the forgotten sheaves as well. So how do you easily break that without anybody being able to take you to court?
You don't go as if you were poor.
Then pick them up.
Yeah,
You drop it, you're supposed to leave it there, but if you pick it up again, no one knows it was there. You've broken the commandment, you've absolutely violated the Torah, but no one can say, I know what you did. Right? There's no way, unless someone happened to be literally witnessing it right then and there and knew your mental state that it was forgotten rather than placed down, that they could absolutely know that you had just broken the commandment.
Take two witnesses.
And so therefore, the only way God can remind us to observe this commandment is to remind us that God knows. God is there, and God knows what you just did.
And it's your own self. You yourself, do you feel guilty about not observing the commandment?
And unfortunately,
at the end of the day, when you start really processing it.
Right, but by the end of the day, the poor person didn't get their food.
Exactly.
I go home and I have a fitful night's sleep. He goes home and starves to death. So my guilt is not quite equivalent to the damage I may have caused. But nobody can prove that. No one can bring the dead body of the poor person to my house tomorrow and say, this is what you did. If there was a knife sticking out of him, sure, that's called murder, and we know how to deal with that. But if it is somebody who has been taken advantage of, and there's no way to prove that I took advantage of them, then I am above human justice. But, says the Torah, I am still below God's justice. And that's why you'll see this phrase in certain passages of reminding us that God is the ultimate judge for these things.
Question.
Yes?
It talks about reaping all the way to the edges. I thought that was a different commandment, talking about the corners of the field.
It is. This is a summation, right? So this is hitting on a number of different aspects of the farmer's poor obligations, or obligations to the poor. So it's covering a number of different topics. They're covered in more detail elsewhere. Yes?
No, I always note that it says the poor and the stranger. which means we have a responsibility to the welfare of the stranger.
Yes,
of-
even among the non-Jews, yes,
Yes.
because they're living in that area. So we don't let them starve to death just because they can't show us their Jewish ID card.
Right,
Correct.
but Christians believe this too, right?
I'm not here to I'm not here to teach Christianity or Christian theology. But I am sure that if you,
Strangers,
Let's not go there.
Okay.
let's instead go to verse 11, and remember that we are here to focus on our own understanding, and maybe if there was any gleeful feelings of displeasure at others, we might want to hold on to that thought for when we reach a few verses down.
Or reject entirely.
You shall not steal. You shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord.
Question,
Yes.
at the end of the previous paragraph, it's got, I am the Lord your God, and in this one, in a couple paragraphs, it says, I am the Lord. What is the difference?
I have not seen a good difference explanation of the slight gradation differences. Here in this particular passage, it's talking about using God's name in a false oath.
Right.
And therefore, when God says, I am the Lord, we have to remember that isn't the title, that is actually God's name, which is reminding us that if you swear by my name, you're forgetting that I am the name. Right? My name is not just a casual word, right? It's not like the English word G-O-D, which does not ever need to be hyphenated. It is actually the Yud, He, Vav, He, the four-letter name which represents God's essence. And therefore, that is what you're swearing by. Don't be stupid. This is not an empty concept.
Well, I'm looking at the Hebrew now. At the
Yep.
end of 10, it says, Ani Adonai Elohim, and then the end of 11, it's got Ani Adonai.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, what's the difference?
Well, again, as I said,
Difference.
there's not a huge thematic difference, but as
Right.
far as emphasis goes, when God says Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am Adonai, your God. God is reminding us that God is over us as our God, and the Elohim is usually reminding us of God's attribute of justice and judgment.
Right.
Whereas in the second one, in verse 12, what God is emphasizing is his name, right? Do not swear by my name, well, especially falsely. Now, you may wonder, why is swearing falsely connected to the same concept of stealing? Well, because in the ancient world, we didn't have security cameras, and we didn't have fingerprints, and we didn't have DNA tests and all of those other ways to tell what was stolen and what wasn't stolen. So if I stole your chicken and ate it, how can you possibly prove that? And the fact was you couldn't. However, if there was a reason to believe that I had stolen your chicken, I would have to go before the judge, and I would have to swear I never ate your chicken. Now, when I do that swear, I would have to use God's name. And what God is saying here is, you're the only one in the room who's going to know whether you're telling the truth or not. Because anybody can get up there and say, I swear by God that I didn't do it. But I'll know, says God, that you are not only lying about what you stole, but you are now compounding that by desecrating my name in a false oath. All right, so you went from having one crime to having.
Is that any similar to court in the old days where they put your hand on a Bible and made you swear?
Of course. I mean, the idea that a person would be more reluctant to swear having just made an oath to God that they wouldn't is a foundational principle of truth-telling in just about every culture. That there is almost always some way to say, come on, do you really mean it this time? Hello.
Put my chair, sit on the floor, right over there.
I think we've got plenty of chairs. So, again, we get this reminder. Moving on to 13.
You shall not defraud your fellow. You shall not commit robbery. The wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning.
No, wait a minute. We don't get I am the Lord or I am the Lord your God.
Not yet.
Why? Because in all of those cases, the person can actually come after you, right? If I don't pay you on time, there's a person who knows I didn't pay you on time, called the victim. And that victim can then take you to court. This is the kind of thing that can be reconciled in an open judicial process. and it's not one that you can weasel out of by simply saying, "Oh, I didn't do it." This can be established. However, when we get to verse 14,
You shall not insult the deaf, or place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord.
I love the
There's
commentary.
the,
I
yeah.
love the commentary on it, obviously.
which we share it for the benefit of people who are not looking at the same verse.
Okay, yeah, there's two of them. I'm sorry. You shall not insult the deaf. Speaking ill of the deaf is especially blameworthy because it involves taking unfair advantage of another's disability.
Exactly, and
I
that's
see it all the time. That's why ADA was created.
and that's why these
Yes.
particular examples are used. Obviously, we shouldn't insult people who aren't hard of hearing either, right? We shouldn't think that the Torah is permitting us to insult people who don't have hearing problems, but we're not likely to insult people without hearing problems because they'll get mad and they'll hit me. And so therefore, I will be a little afraid of just going around and calling someone names if I think they're going to hear me. On the other hand, if they're deaf, I can call them all the things I want because I don't have to be afraid of their reaction.
I'll send you the link to the spinal cord pamphlets and documents on disability etiquette and all that later.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been driving this almost 26 years now. It is absolutely okay to ask a person in the wheelchair, they ask how you got your wheelchair. And my answer is, well, 26 years ago, I was working on Shabbat and fell off a ladder.
Okay.
2 vertebrae in my back compressed, 1 chipped. So I'm partially paralyzed. So I use the expression, so many toes, so little time, have wheelchair will travel and stuff like that. And yes, there are good days and bad days, but we've known each other a long time. And it's absolutely okay. Do not lean on my wheelchair. It is a part of my body. It's part of me. Please don't do that.
Well, you really shouldn't be.
Or anything like that, or pull, ask for it. Always need to ask first and talk to the person directly and not to a caregiver. I'll send you the disability. There's all kinds of good stuff out there on spinal cords.
Very, very, very. What should seem like obvious advice, and yet people are easily confused and often will make stupid things. And in this particular case, we're not talking about accidental insults. We're talking about deliberate insults. And we're not talking about accidental tripping up of someone who's blind. We're talking about doing it deliberately. And again, the blind person, the deaf person may never even know that you did it or that it even happened. And God does know. And therefore, you need to be on guard against doing things that lack a human reprisal, because that should not be the only thing you're afraid of. Sorry, I was going to the hand.
I find it interesting that is the Hebrew word fear really there? Because it really makes it much stronger.
Yes.
Say,
well, I mean, fear.
the other ones don't say it says, I am the Lord.
Well, yirah, it definitely has the word,
fear.
The root for yirah, right? You will be in trembling awe and, fear of God. It's a slippery word because fear in English has only really one connotation.
Yeah.
It's only negative. But to have enough respect and awe that one will be on guard more carefully is what this concept is talking about. It's not just about like being afraid of the dark kind of fear. It is understanding that there is some authority over you that has the ability to really to really punish if you have behaved this way, and therefore you shouldn't do it. It's the respect you give to the principal of the school, assuming you hold the principal of your school in any sort of respect. That sort of, wow, I really shouldn't be shooting my mouth off in front of the principal. That's the kind of attitude that is being discussed here. Yes, it's an attitude that we find in shorter and shorter supply in modern times, but one that is still important for guiding our action, which is going to bring us now to 696 and verse 15.
You shall not render an unfair decision. Do not favor the poor or show deference to the rich. Judge your kinsmen fairly. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow. I am the Lord.
All right, so the do not profit by the blood of your fellow is one of my least favorite translations in this particular section of the Torah by the Jewish Publication Society translation, because the phrase is famously lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Do not stand
Stand.
well, it doesn't say idly literally. I do not stand upon the blood of your fellow. Now, you can see how they get the translation. I do not lift yourself up on the blood of someone else, which means basically don't profit by someone else's hardship. And that is perfectly true and in keeping with Torah principles. But at least in classical interpretations, lo ta'amod adam re'echa has been interpreted to mean do not stand by while someone else is bleeding, meaning do not be passive when there is an opportunity to assist someone else. So that we can see that traditionally that has been the usual translation. Now, JPS tried to translate it more in line of what they thought the previous two verses meant, which was an idea of unfair judgment and unfair taking advantage. And they were using this as being a third way of describing taking advantage of someone. But again, classically, that has not been the interpretation of that particular verse. Onward, or we'll never finish today.
You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kinsmen, but incur no guilt because of them. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord. You shall observe my law.
We'll pause there. Okay. So you shall not take vengeance. You shall not bear a grudge. You shall not hate the person in your heart. Instead, you should love them as yourself. And that section is what we're going to try and unpack, because although many of the other sections we've talked about are a little tricky, this section is perhaps the least immediately understandable when we try to turn it into a prescription for action. We might think it's understandable, but hopefully I'll confuse you before we're done.
Yeah, it is. What is love?
Well, what is love and what is vengeance?
Right.
Right? What does it mean to have a grudge? What does it mean to rebuke someone, which we won't go into too much detail today. Although the word rebuke is one of my favorite, no longer used in any other piece of English except the Torah translation words. When was the last time someone used the word rebuke in casual conversation? Exactly. When was the last time you saw the word rebuke in any book written in the 21st century? That wasn't talking about Torah. Exactly. It's one of these words that have become preserved in amber because it's used just within biblical context. So it means, of course, to chastise or criticize someone and point out the mistakes that they've made, which, God forbid. All right, so we're going to pick up with, it is written.
It is written, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord. What would be a practical illustration?
All right, so what the Yerushalmi is trying to get to our attention here is those two parts of that verse don't fit together, if you think about it, right? Why do I have to go from not bearing a grudge and not taking vengeance to actually loving the person as myself? I mean, it's one thing to say, don't bear grudge, don't take vengeance. It's another thing to say, love the person as yourself. There's a huge chasm between there where you just do nothing, all right? Where the person has been mean to you and you do nothing. This is saying the person's been mean to you, love them like yourself. That's a huge leap that goes well beyond what we would normally expect to come in response to someone treating you badly. So the Yerushalmi is trying to explain how these actually fit together, or we can say go hand in hand.
If one was cutting meat and the knife in his hand cut his hand, would he go and cut the other hand?
Right, so if you're cutting meat and your knife cuts this hand, do you say, oh, you wicked hand, put the knife in your other hand and then hit it back? No, we would call you an absolute idiot for doing that. I mean, what? Do you think that this hand was happier because this hand got cut? Do you think this hand deserves vengeance against this hand? No. Why do we think that's ridiculous? Because both of those hands are part of the same person, right? We are one thing. And so the fact that one thing got damaged doesn't mean we should damage another part of the same thing. What is the implication then of what the Yerushalmi is trying to tell us when it comes to people? Pull out that analogy for me. Bring the metaphor into people, not hands. One person has insulted you.
We're all part of the same body.
We're all part of the same body, right? Why does it make no sense for me to insult you back after you insulted me? Because I'm insulting myself. I'm insulting a piece of myself. right? Because we are all part of the same thing called humanity. And for me to take vengeance, it would be as ludicrous as me beating up my hand because it hurt the other hand. But that's not how we view the world, right? We view the world as being, you're over there, I'm over here, and when your little bit of reality is bad to my bit of reality, I should beat up your bit of reality verbally or physically. And the Torah is telling us, and the Yerushalmi is making it very clear, that's not how reality actually is put together. Right? And this was a quick caveat. We're not talking about proper self-defense. We're not talking about, defensive wars or other issues where obviously, yes, sometimes we do have to defend ourselves, even including violence. We're talking about issues here that have to do with vengeance or grudges that have nothing to do with those sorts of situations.
Michael, that the whole holiness idea is to look at the world and each other the way God does.
Exactly. And as far as God's concerned, we're all one thing. Right? It's
Okay.
It's like there are mushrooms that grow in parts of the world that look like that, but underneath there is a huge interconnected web between all of them. Now, you may think that this mushroom and this mushroom and this mushroom are all different. They're all just protrusions of the same organism.
Like the aspen trees.
Like the aspen trees as well. The largest creature, if you will, the largest organism on Earth looks like a forest, but it's actually one tree. Right? But that's not the way we look at the world. We look and we see a bunch of trees, and we can't see that there isn't trees, but tree. And so too for humans, right? We think we see a bunch of humans, but in fact, all humans are connected on a much deeper level, and therefore taking vengeance against them is as pointless as hitting yourself because you're unhappy with some other part of yourself, which is not recommended. Just make sure we're clear on that, right? You make a mistake, you don't say, oh, I'm so bad, and hurt your, no, that's not a good idea. All right, but the Sefer HaChinuch is going to try and show us a little bit more practical of what this means.
In the language of the Sikra, how far does the force of vengeance reach? If one asked another, lend me your sickle, and the other did not lend it to him, then the next day the other asked him, lend me your pickaxe, and he responded, in the same way that you would not lend me yours, I will not lend you mine.
All right, so that's vengeance, right? If I ask you, hey, we're having a party, is it okay if some people park in your driveway because otherwise we'll be blocking the street? And my neighbor says, no, you can't park in my driveway. And I say, okay, I can't force him to let my guests park in his driveway. And then 2 weeks later, he's having a party and he comes over to me and says, hey, we're having a party. Would you mind if people parked in your driveway? And I went, oh, yeah, well, you wouldn't let my guests park in your driveway? Well, there's no way I'm letting you do that either. That's vengeance. And that is prohibited.
So
that attitude is wrong. But grudges are a little different.
how far does the force of a grudge go? If one asks for a sickle and the other refuses, then the next day the other asks for a pickaxe, he replies, here it is, I am not like you.
So gloatingly giving the person what they want, but still reminding them of the fact that they had not, that's still prohibited. It's also satisfying,
It's very satisfying.
but it is still prohibited, right? Because you didn't actually improve the relationship there. Even though you gave them what they asked for, you still kept that wound open between the two of you. You didn't use this as an opportunity to heal and actually mend the relationship. And there's two ways to keep a wound going. One is to continue to poke it and break it again and again, and the other is to simply prevent it from healing by constantly making sure that it stays open and raw. And grudges and vengeance are those two different varieties when it comes to our personal relationships. Make sense? Okay, so how does this work?
At the root of this commandment is that one should consider and take to heart that whatever happens, good or bad, is caused by God, no matter whose hand does it. Therefore, if another inflicts pain upon him, let him know that his deeds were the cause.
All right, that is a controversial statement.
Yeah.
Right? Because what the Sefer HaChinuch is basically saying here is when the guy said you couldn't park in his driveway and was rude about it, that is your fault. Now, it may not be your fault because you asked him the wrong way or your fault because of something, that you did, but at some level, your actions are what God is choosing to punish you through the vehicle of this other person.
Remember the story, Joseph and his brothers, and they come to Judah, they're all hungry, and Judah says to his brothers, they're all this bad stuff is happening.
Because of how we treated Joseph.
Because of how we treated Joseph 30 years ago.
He certainly sees it that way.
So he's seen that God's hand it may not be an immediate cause, but
it catches up to you. It catches up to you eventually, and that's what Sefer HaChinuch is going through. But now there's a very useful psychological purpose to this, which is to say, I'm much less likely to want to take revenge on someone if I see what they did to me as being ultimately rooted in God's justice for me. Then why would I take vengeance, right? Am I going to take vengeance against God? Unless you're going to take vengeance against God, there's no point taking vengeance against this person. And even if it was against God, this person is just doing what God has put them in this place to do. And it's not really their fault.
Constantly right now, several people are in jail, and I remind them, don't ask, why did this happen to me, but what does God want you to learn from this happening to you?
But
so the way to look at it.
But of course, there is a certain limit to this, and the Joseph story is very poignant about that, which is to say, even though we are unhappy with what happened, sometimes it actually is the other person's fault. Right? It's not always our fault. Otherwise, why did God punish Pharaoh? Why did God punish the Egyptians? Right? If the Egyptians were just doing to us what we had already somehow earned, then it doesn't seem fair that they should get punished. And yet our tradition says, no, they should get punished because they chose to be the vehicle of this issue. Right? God did not say the Egyptians had to enslave us. God simply said we would be strangers in a strange land. And the Egyptians chose to do this, and they chose to do much more than God had ever wanted, and therefore punishment was entirely appropriate. So we can't go around blaming victims, but as a self-reflection and as a way to blunt our instinct for vengeance or grudges, to try and at least look for some element of personal culpability is a useful first step technique. This is not to excuse the bad that other people do, but it is a good way to prevent us from doing bad in return. Good? Good. Onward.
Another benefit of this mitzvah is it stops intention and removes hate from people's hearts. For when there is peace among people, God grants them peace.
Right? You want peace? Make peace first. Right? Make peace among each other, and then there will be peace at large. And the only way to make peace among each other is to not perpetuate a cycle of vengeance and grudge holding. Without that, then there will always be strife and contention and hate. If it's always, you did blah, 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 and then there will never be an end. And that happens on the micro level of arguing with a sibling or another loved one. And it happens on the macro level of, when you guys were in power, you did this. And so now we get to do. No, it doesn't work like that. Right? Vengeance and grudge holding at any level is only delaying peace. Period. Again, doesn't mean we can't have justice, doesn't mean that we can't carry out the rule of law, but it does mean you have to look very, very carefully before you behave and say, and what is what I'm doing about what I'm about to do for justice, for goodness, or is it just because I want to get back at what someone else did to me? And if the answer is even a little bit of number two, don't do it.
On this one.
Yes.
Where it says, when there is peace among people, God grants them peace. That's not countries. That's households or friendships or.
Yes, all of it. That is to say, peace begins with an individual and the people immediately around them. It moves from them to the larger community that isn't just their household. It moves from a community to a town, a city, to a state, to a country, to a world. Right? Peace begins on an individual level. We don't need to wait for countries to make peace before we make peace with our family. We make peace first, and the rest of humanity is built up of all those tiny little pieces of people. And cumulatively, if each little piece is at peace, there will be peace on the larger level as well. But unfortunately, we focus way too much on peace between countries and too little about peace amongst ourselves. Okay, onward.
Many commandments depend on love your fellow as yourself. A person who loves another as himself will not steal from him, will not commit adultery with his wife, will not cheat him in business or deceive him with words, will not move his boundary marker, and will not harm him in any way.
The idea of loving another as yourself gives us an immediate feedback test of, should I do this? Well, if it happened to me, I wouldn't like it. So no, I won't. Right? That simple act of empathy of, if I were in that person's shoes, as a test before you do any sort of activity, is a really, really great way to ensure that all the other commandments are also observed. Right? Because I may think stealing is fine because I really, really like what they have, or they really, really deserve it. But if I stop for a second and say, yeah, but if that was stolen from me, I would be really, really mad and probably not go, oh, well, it probably was deserved. I would also be upset. That's a good reason not to steal, even if the reason not to steal for being a commandment wasn't sufficient. Right? So this is an ultimate foundational way to ensure the observance of many, many other commandments.
Okay, I love this from Art Scrolls Kumash. It says on page 662 regarding Leviticus 19:18. Correct my pronunciation. Kabbalah offers a realistic example of how to fulfill the commandment, how to love one another. 1, your affection for the others should be real, not feigned. Always treat others with respect. Always seek the best for them. Join in their pain. Greet them with friendliness. Give the benefit of the doubt. Assist them physically, even in matters that are not very difficult. My point is, ask first. Be ready to assist with small or even moderate loans or gifts. Do not consider yourself better than them.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. I mean,
it's a very good summary.
Very good summary. Yeah.
But one that's going to raise a few issues in just a couple commentaries as well. We're going to get to a little pushback on that list and some of the things we've already discussed. So let's go ahead and finish up Sifra, where we get a little bit more of this is historical empathy.
Shall be to you the stranger that lives among you, and you shall love him as yourself.
All right. So who else are we told to love as ourselves? The stranger. Right. We're told to love our fellow as ourselves, our re'echa, and we're also told to love the stranger as ourselves. And so, of course, the Midrash has to try and see, well, wait, why?
Just as it is written of Jews in Leviticus 19:18, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Know the soul of the strangers, for you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Right. So according to the Midrash, the reason we are commanded to love the strangers, in addition to being told to love ourselves, which could be limited as only loving other Jewish people, is to remind ourselves that we also were strangers elsewhere, and that feeling, that situation, that vulnerability is something that should create an empathy for others because they are us. Right? A stranger, a person who is not in their native land, they're us. We've been there. We've done that. We know exactly what that is. They are like us, and therefore we should love them the same way we love ourselves, and we love each other. Because this is like looking into a mirror.
I'm a Jew by choice. And this is one of my favorite selections, and it's repeated, 3-4 times in Torah?
We are told to love the stranger multiple times, and not to defraud the stranger,
yes.
and many other protections.
Yes. Exactly. Okay.
Exactly. All right. However, do we mean this like love? Do you like him? Right? to talk like a junior high school student. The Ramban is going to push back on this.
The phrase love your neighbor as yourself cannot be meant literally, since man cannot be expected to love his neighbor as himself. Moreover, as Rabbi Akiva has ruled, that your life comes first.
Right. So the classic Rabbi Akiva discussion of if you're walking through the desert and you've only got enough water that's yours to survive for you, and there's like another person with you, are you forced to share your water so you both die, or can you keep the water to yourself and make it out the desert alive? And the answer is, it's your water, you can keep it. You can't take his water, right? You can't take more than your share of communal water, but if it's your water, you are allowed to prefer your own survival over that of someone else. And that kind of, Ramban points out, means I don't love him like I love me, right? Because I do, to some degree, want to keep walking more than I want him to keep walking. Or else I would simply say, no, you take the water and off you go. And that, says Ramban, is perfectly fine and understandable and acceptable. But if that means then that I don't love him literally like myself, what does it mean to love another as myself in truth?
The Torah here enjoins us that we should wish upon our neighbor the same benefits that we wish upon ourselves. Perhaps this is the reason for the dative instead of the accusative form of the verb phrase. We find the same in, and you shall love him as yourself. Indeed, sometimes a person may wish upon his neighbor certain benefits, but only wealth, not wisdom and the like.
We may want good for our neighbor, but not all the good. I wish that my neighbor became wealthy, but let me still be smarter than him. Or I wish my neighbor became wealthy, or smart, but let me stay richer than him. Sometimes we are competitive, or at least a little limited in how much good we wish to bless our neighbor with, or wish to pray on their behalf.
But even if he wishes his cherished friend well in everything, that is wealth, honor, learning, and wisdom, he will not do so unstintingly. He will still insist on a larger share of benefits.
Right? May we all be blessed by the wonderful prosperity of our community, and may I have just a little bit more than everyone else. I mean, that there is a certain element of human nature that is almost impossible to overcome, to truly wish the same for everybody as myself. It simply is unreasonable to expect that to ever be what we are asked to do. Moreover, let's finish this first, then
It
comment.
is this shortcoming that the Torah condemned. Rather, a man should wish his fellow well in everything, just as he does in his own case, and he should place no limitations on his love.
Right, so that's the ultimate goal, he says. So yes, it is understandable that you're going to want to wish good, but only good enough for the other person, and you're going to want to wish better for yourself. But that is what the Torah is trying to argue against. Is we're not asking you to actually give more. We're just asking you to not hold back in your blessing, right? To actually legitimately want everything that is good and possible for another person.
Therefore, in the case of Yonatan and David, it says that Yonatan loved him as his own soul, since he had removed all jealousy from his heart, declaring, "And you shall rule over Israel."
Right? Jonathan was perfectly fine with the idea that David would be blessed to be king, even though that meant he might not be king. Right? That he was okay with that because he truly did love him as himself. What difference did it make whether David was king or whether he was king? Right? He truly just wished and blessed whatever the blessing would possibly be, up to and including the kingship of Israel. And that's ultimately the goal that we're asking for here. Not that you have to go out and divide all of your worldly possessions equally among everyone else, but that you at least bless them the same way you would wish to be blessed, and with the fullness. Good? Now, comment?
Good segue. Reminds me of that famous quote in Fiddler on the Roof that the rabbi does to the czar. May the Lord bless and keep the czar far, far away from
Yeah, under Tsarist Russia, it was hard to wish for a full goodness for the leadership.
But when you use that the example of Jonathan and David were really close, which makes sense with love your neighbor. But then it also goes on to say love the stranger too. I mean, I don't think Jonathan would be okay with just some random guy saying, "Hey, take my crown.
Let this other guy be king." Right. So, but then the question becomes, where in the relationship does this happen? That is to say, where do we achieve the ability to wish and bless another person fully? Is that the end result of a lifetime of friendship? Or is that where we should be trying to approach another person, even if we have not gotten to know them that well yet? So yes, the specific example of the kingship, that is only prefaced by the idea that David indeed had already been anointed king by God. It wasn't like Jonathan was just willing to have anyone else be king. But if someone else had been anointed by God, I do believe that Jonathan had the capacity in his soul to truly want whatever God was willing to bless another person with. Doesn't mean that he was going to just give his crown up to any old person. But if God had anointed someone else, I think Jonathan would have been okay with that. But that just wasn't what happened in that particular story. All right, onward a little bit to Sephorno.
Love your fellow is telling us to apply the same yardstick to our concern for our fellow that we would want applied to ourselves if we were in his shoes in similar situations.
All right, again, one of the best ways to simply go is to say, look, if I were in that position, what would I want to be done for me? What would I expect as far as attitude or relationship to be happening? And that, if we do it honestly, will go a long way towards loving the person as ourselves. Just judging them as I would hope to be judged is this really big step towards loving them as myself.
Would you call this a restatement of, I think it's also a proverb, do unto others as you would have them do unto you?
The golden rule, as it's sometimes referred to. Yes, this is indeed
incorporated a proverb.
Another way of restating and re-examining that, and not the only one that we will do. But let's continue with Shadal.
All other transgressions against one's fellow man are objectively immoral.
Right. If I murder you, if I steal from you, if I, bear false witness against you, I think we can all easily say that I recognize, even if I'm the one who did it, that it was immoral to do. Right. We would all agree. Murder, wrong. Good. However,
except for revenge, which seems like justice.
Right, isn't it? When I take vengeance or when I hold a grudge, doesn't it just seem that I'm doing what I should, right? That I'm just finding justice in the situation out of whatever the bad thing happened. I'm just holding them accountable for whatever that person did.
It's rough justice.
Yeah, I mean, I am God's instrument, not transgressing, and yet the Torah tells you don't take vengeance, don't hold a judge. Instead, love your neighbor as yourself.
Therefore, love your fellow as yourself. Just like you don't want others to take revenge on you, so you should not take revenge on your fellow, even though you are in the right to take revenge.
Because you will always think you're in the right to take revenge. That's the nature of the beast. Revenge always seems right to you. It never seems immoral. It just seems absolutely justified. And it's precisely because it seems so justified and comes so easily to us that we have to be more careful, and why God put love your fellow as yourself at this point in the Torah, rather than putting it at the introduction page or putting it as one of the final sentences. God put it right here with the concept of vengeance and and grudging someone, because that was a commandment that most of us would never see as being self-evident. Right? Vengeance seems the obvious choice. Holding a grudge seems the natural thing to do, and it doesn't seem wrong. It doesn't feel wrong. And therefore, love your fellow as yourself.
And so too, in all other ways, you should love your fellow as you love yourself. And Moses Mendelssohn interpreted it as, you shall love your fellow in all the ways of love that you love yourself. Equal in quality of love and not in its quantity, whenever there is no conflict between two beloved things. However, that's similar to the trait of a sodomite.
Which, remember, sodomite in the rabbinic tradition has nothing to do with what that word has come to mean in the modern vernacular.
Saying to the fathers, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. For how can I benefit my fellow without causing myself loss or effort, light or heavy? For there will always be a conflict between my benefit and other people's benefit, and there is no way to give peruta,
which is like a penny,
to my friend without losing a peruta from my own pocket.
Right. So when God tells us to love others as ourselves, Mendelssohn, according to Shadal, erroneously interpreted this to mean that means we should have an affection of love for everyone, even if it wasn't the same quantity for everyone, right? So of course I'm going to love my wife more than I love a stranger, but the basic quality of love will be same throughout everything in existence. And Sforno is basically crying foul. That doesn't work, right? Because that is basically saying, I love you all and I'll do nothing. Right? It's just talking about the emotional state that I have towards other people. And Sforno, and I believe the rest of Jewish tradition, says it's not just about an emotional state. Yes, the emotional state is important to cultivate, but it's also about limiting our behavior. And if you're just saying, I love everybody equally, but what's in my wallet stays in my wallet, And I never help another person because, hey, if I help you, it means I'm taking from myself. And if I take from myself, that's the same as taking from you because I love you like myself. So just as I wouldn't steal from you, I can't steal from myself to help you. Then you're not actually helping. You're not actually loving the person the way the Torah has asked you to love the other person. It's not just about having goodness in your heart and your hands in, your lap. It's about having goodness in your heart and reaching out to do good, not just feel good. Because feeling good, really easy. Doing good will always involve personal loss, whether it be small or large. And Shadal is reminding us of that. Good? Okay.
When a Gentile who wanted to convert came to Hillel and presumptuously demanded, "Teach me the Torah in the time it takes to stand on one foot," Hillel answered, "What is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go and learn."
Right. Very famous section from the Talmud. Right. Very famous section. And one that's going to be now held up for a little critique.
The central principle of the Torah is love your neighbor. This is worded in positive, that is active language. Why did Hillel use negative language, that is do not do?
Right. If Hillel was basically interpreting the sentence that we've been analyzing here of loving someone as yourself, that is a very positive statement. And positive not just as in, yay, it's good, but positive meaning do something, take an action, be active in some way. But Hillel, when he interpreted this for the person who was coming, which was a little obnoxious in the way the person came, he interprets it just with the don't do, which seems like an unnecessary flip. Why didn't he just say, love your neighbor as yourself? Right? Why do it in the reverse? And so the explanation is given.
Hillel saw that this person was not able to take on as heavy an obligation as to actively do good for others. It was enough to tell him not to hurt anybody. To tell him to do good or to love another unconditionally as himself would have been over this man's understanding. So all that could be asked of such a person is to not do any harm.
Right? And this is actually something that is showing great realism in Judaism. Of course, we have the ideal that a person should actively love and both in their heart as well as in your actions other people. But we also recognize not everyone can reach that level from where they're currently standing, 1 foot or not. And sometimes that means the best we can do is diminish the capacity to hurt other people. And for some people, that language is much easier for them to relate to and to understand. I know for many children and students that I've worked with, they can't understand the idea of doing something actively to benefit other people and what the other person wants, but they can absolutely grasp how upset they would be if something happened to them that was bad.
I once heard a commentary on the Hippocratic Oath, which opens with do no harm,
Right.
And the question was, why doesn't it open with heal the sick?
Because sometimes you have to start with where you are. And that means,
Discussion earlier for the rabbi.
yeah, put the knife down. Put the knife down.
Right, it was sometimes you have to
Right.
refrain yourself from your zeal to do something that'll end up causing more harm.
Absolutely. And in this particular case, Hillel very astutely, because of the person's obnoxious way of asking the question, very astutely understood that this person was not ready to hear the love your neighbor as yourself formulation. This person needed training wheels, if you will, on their moral development.
Well, with a lot of people, it's three most important people in the world, and me, myself, and I.
That's it.
And this is telling,
And it's unfortunate, but we don't think of others.
but this is also
Courtesy.
telling us when we meet people like that, we don't respond to them as with a grudge or with a vengeance or with anger. Remember, that's part of the story of Hillel, is that this guy shows up and he's obnoxious and he'd already gotten chased away by Shammai, who had no time for this nonsense. But when he comes to Hillel, Hillel says, don't do what is hateful to others, which is also Hillel saying, would you like someone to come and talk to you like this? Would you like someone to come and be this presumptuous and arrogant to you about something that you could teach them? Think about the position that you're in. But notice Hillel did not respond with anger. Hillel did not respond with vengeance. Hillel did not respond with a grudge. Hillel is embodying what he is trying to teach, because if he asked a question that might seem rude to someone else, he wouldn't want that person to respond with a full-blown fit. He would want them to help them understand that what they had said was wrong or rude or offensive. And that patience that Hillel is trying to create in this individual, Hillel is exemplifying through himself, and does so throughout many different episodes of rabbinic literature.
That thing you said about not wanting vengeance,
Mhm.
does that only apply not wanting vengeance by yourself? Because I think they had a communal justice system. So your other option would be to go complain to.
Well, if there has been a wrong that has broken a law, you use the court to resolve that, of course. But that's not vengeance. That's implementation of Torah and justice. And if the court ends up saying this person didn't do anything wrong,
Right.
you're supposed to let it go.
Yes.
Right? That you're supposed to accept that the court has run its course and we've reached a verdict, and that verdict is not guilty, or doesn't owe you for the tree, or doesn't have to pay you for the sheep, or whatever the case may possibly be. And if you're still raging against the machine, remember, Ani Adonai. This is God is the one who created this, and God is certainly above all of this, and God will take care of anyone who lied their way out of the problem about whether they stole a sheep or didn't, or ate your chicken or didn't. God will take care of that ultimately. You should not be damaged by vengeance and by hate and by anger and grudging.
I was going to say this.
We'll do a loop.
I was going to say, but the other thing I was going to touch on is you see what's called victim-driven prosecution today.
About
Victim-driven.
Right.
So, I mean, how far is the victims allowed to go in pursuing these claims against the other person?
They don't. I mean, if you stole my chicken, right,
Yes.
and I saw you, but I don't have additional evidence and all of that, then I would take you to court, and they would say, well, we don't have any other evidence. Do you swear you didn't take that person's chicken? That's how we would handle it. And then once you swore, assuming you were, willing to swear and not just pay for the stolen chicken, then we would be done.
But if
I don't get to do more.
I saw you steal my chicken, I'm just gonna take it back from you.
It's revenge.
Well, so then that becomes a problem. There's this additional commentary that wouldn't fit on the page,
And
which
then-
is if you steal something back from someone else who has taken
But
it
it's
from
not
you,
stealing if you've taken I'm taking what belongs to
if you
God.
act in a way that would resemble a thief to any additional outside observer, which is to say, I'm taking it back not by walking into your house and saying, hey, that's my chicken, I need that, but instead I'm sneaking into your house when you're out, taking the chicken and leaving, which by any objective optics would be considered theft, then you're not actually fixing the problem, because now that person just feels that they were robbed. So now you feel like you were robbed, they feel like they were robbed, and we have no additional peace. On the other hand, if you go to the court, if you go to the person and say, hey, I saw you take the chicken, I'd like that back, if you find other ways to resolve it, now we have at least the potential to fix that breach. But just taking it into my own hands almost invariably will lead to an escalation of the problem, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
And it's exactly why Shadal said, all other transgressions seem immoral, vengeance doesn't. I feel in my right to take this action. And that's why God had to say, don't. Because we really, really just feel naturally inclined to just do what we think is right, especially when we've been wronged. But unfortunately, that will only perpetuate more and more negative situations. There are other remedies, is what God is telling us. There are, and it's not just turn the cheek, it's absolutely take the guy to court. Absolutely go and talk to the cops. Absolutely find a way to resolve the issue. But it can't be just with vengeance, and it can't be just by holding a grudge. Just to show you the ubiquity of this concept, that it is really around the world, I just brought one little quote here from Chinese philosophy.
Qigong asks, is there any single word that could guide one's entire life? Confucius replied, should it not be reciprocity? What you do not wish for yourself, do not do to others.
Right? If you simply hold on to that concept and apply it equally and consistently, it will make a world of difference. And it's something that was so obvious that it didn't even need the revelation of Sinai to teach us. Thankfully, God gave us the revelation to help reinforce and give all of the details we've been discussing. but everyone everywhere in their heart knows this to be true. They just choose to follow it to varying degrees. And it's up to us to do better and better. All right, take care, everyone. We do have Mishnah class tonight.
I ate my grandson when he bites his noise.